Okay, we're live. We're back at Ways and Means, and we're gonna hear from Kirby Keaton. Let's get-
Preference. A lot of preference. What you'd like to hear about first? Reappraisals, classifications, or just miscellaneous provisions?
Miscellaneous.
Reappraisals, please.
Okay.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
miscellaneous is on brand, that is on brand.
Oh, we're in trouble.
We are in trouble now.
For 2.1?
Same as one, where are we?
Yeah, you have to look under my name and I heard reappraisals to start.
Yes, please.
Stuck in my head now. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Which one? You keep forgetting.
Switch out?
Hey, good afternoon. Oh. I lost it.
Because you keep forgetting.
What's up? Good afternoon, Kirby Keaton, Legislative Council. There's a lot of testimony yesterday, right? And a lot of feedback about appraisals. So the language I have for you to look at, you know, the history here is aside from one sentence, which I will show you, what the Department of Taxes, given their testimony yesterday, has said that they would prefer to be in this bill. So this is from the Department of Taxes modifying versions of things that I showed you earlier with some large changes. So that we know what we're looking at here. So to remind you, when it comes to changes, upcoming changes for reappraisals, we had contemplated creating a new subchapter within Chapter 121 and Title 32. It was going to start with legislative intent, which is still there. So we've seen this before. Previously, when I talked about the importance of the legislative intent for this, I talked about for PBR to do the work it's going to be doing going forward relating to mass reappraisals, that having a legislative intent section could be helpful to guide PBR in their future decision-making and with the discretionary parts that they have within the subchapter. This does not do nearly as much as what we had thought of before, but there are still parts where PBR has to make some calls, and so the legislative intent is there to help guide that. The next section, you'll see that there's a highlighted part, is the establishment of regional assessment districts. That has not changed here. There are 12 of them based off of counties. That has not changed based off of previous versions. The one fairly significant change is that it would have these regional assessment districts work together to fully and jointly reappraise their grand lists every 6 years. Previously, it had been considered that PBR would be in charge of that. This language takes PBR out of the central role there and puts it on the member municipalities to work together to do a regional mass reappraisal every 6 years. So pretty significant change in direction there. It also says that the member municipalities of a regional assessment district will contract jointly with a third party to conduct reappraisals. So that question gets answered right there in statute. These municipalities will not be doing it themselves. They would be paying a firm to do it under this language.
Presented was Ozzy.
And you can tell me to wait if this is addressed later. Is PBR going to do like the convening or organizing, or is it up to the municipalities to organize themselves? I know it says shall, so they have to.
Sure. So What I would say about this language is that it puts some things in place, not nearly as big of a structure as we were talking about before. It puts a few things in place and then puts a lot of work on that working group that we had talked about previously and that the department has consistently said it wanted to see happen, and have that working group figure out further details for things, including questions related to this language here and whether this should actually be the permanent state of the statute. And we will get into that. So sub B here is what I said before about the counties. There's still a section here about standard guidelines, procedures, and rulemaking. A lot of it is still the same for PBR to put out guidance to help these regional assessment districts. Again, though not express language putting PBR in charge of calling any shots with it though. And then there's this subsection B here that says PBR will establish a schedule for each regional assessment district to fully reappraise every 6 years. And at the director's discretion, they may alter that. Previous versions of this work did not give PBR that amount of discretion. It was more limited to for specific reasons. But this is just basically giving PBR full discretion to decide what that 6-year reappraisal schedule will look like, okay? And that's it. That's it as far as changes in statute to change how reappraisals are done. I'm going to go through what's not in here at this point before we go on to the transition report. There's no difference in the appeal structure in this. We had talked about taking the current appeal structure, altering it quite a lot, and moving it out of that appeals chapter into this chapter. None of that's done here. So current law, where there's grievances, then there's BCA, then there's an appeal to either the commissioner or to PBR or to court. Current law for appeals stays the same here.
Same BCA local.
Yes. Yes. No big change to and what that also meant was since all of those sections weren't being moved around, stuff like utility valuations is just staying put where it is, living in statute. Yeah, and so no regional property valuation boards. There's no appeals directly to the commissioner of taxes. Current law is that those appeals are done to PBR with the part-time hearing officers. That's staying the same. There's no full-time tax hearing officer being considered in this language. No change at all to grievances. The per parcel fees and reappraisal fundings untouched here. Yeah, and then like I said before, the appeals chapter is staying the way it is. So it really is about establishing the RADs. That's what we've got for current changes. We have a transition section here that just sets the stage for reappraisals being transitioned over to the regional system. Same timeline as before, where with the way that reappraisals are being ordered under the law now, to let that play itself out, it would mean to start doing this in 2030. So that's what it does. On or before every January 15, tax is going to come back and report relating to the progress made and preparing to the switch over to the regional assessment districts, but that's really all they have to report on as far as what we have here. But then there's some more reporting, which is the working group itself. So this is what Department of Taxes has said it's wanted ever since the Act 68 report. On or before January 15, 2026, the Department of Taxes, in consultation with relevant stakeholders. So we're not trying to specify or call that out or be limiting at all in who tax can talk to for this. They'll submit recommendations to the tax committees advising on the implementation of regional assessment districts and on the development of guidelines, procedures, and rules needed to effectuate a regionalized appraisal system. The one sentence that was added here that did not come from tax is the next one. It says, the recommendations will include an analysis of the advantages and disadvantages of having the state take full responsibility for regionalized appraisals. So not forgetting that concept of having PVR possibly organize these reappraisals in the future. So that sentence was added to make sure that there's some reporting in the future on that concept and it doesn't get forgotten. It may or may not have been forgotten because some of this other reporting that tax, the way that they had written it, could involve that too. It says, in making its recommendation, the Department of Taxes shall provide suggestions for legislative language that address, one, the authority or authorities who will contract for and conduct reappraisals. So one of those could be PVR, but it could also be any number of other things, right? Number two, the authority or authorities who will hear and decide property valuation appeals. Again, they'll consider if there needs to be any changes to the appeal structure or if any new board or hearing officer setup needs to be done. Third, the amendments necessary to conform statute to the change from April 1 to January 1 of the grand list, which is still in here, by the way. And number four, any other recommendations relating to regionalized reappraisal system. Section 4 here is, part of transitioning the entire timeline to a January 1 grand list date. And the rest of it, I believe, is all of the conforming changes I had included in the bill before that relate to January 1. But all of the conforming changes I made related to the appeals changes and everything else, those are removed in this language. So there you have it. Two big things: setting up a regional assessment districts, but having municipalities run the show, and two, change of the grand list date. Those are the two big substantive things done here.
PVR doing a stakeholder group to come back with specific recommendations. I mean, that's pretty big.
Yes, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm glad to see the words legislative language used. Because Act 68 report was wonderful. They did not have legislative language. So
In your nonpartisan way.
it's helpful. It's helpful, to not have to translate things, right? It's helpful to know what they really mean with their language. So.
Representative Maslin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I preferred having PVR doing the assessment, but I understand thought that it was a whole lot of work. And I understand why they just as soon have it done. And so I'm fine with that. I think that's, in practical terms, that's where we end up. I've seen these words before not be the best, but we'll just figure it out. They'll just figure it out.
Yeah. Madam Chair.
Sorry to interrupt you, Representative Maslin. I can't see your faces, so it's hard to know when I'm interrupting. I just want to repeat what I heard from the tax department yesterday, that they've wanted more time to study this and work with stakeholders, but they think that it's possible they would wind up in the exact same place that the previous version of the bill was, on the exact same timeline. They just want to have sort of a second round of study and collaboration before they come back to us with it. So it's possible we won't wind up with a state managed regional system, and it's possible that we will, and this still leaves space for either, but it gives more time for tax to figure that out amongst themselves and with all the stakeholders that have been speaking with us. So I think in the end, we could wind up in a stronger place on the same timeline. That's what I heard from tax yesterday.
Representative Feltus.
I agree. I appreciate the approach that PVR came to us yesterday, saying that they really wanted to have a working group to go over a lot of these issues and help them figure out timing and exactly how it might work. I would prefer that we do not establish the 12 districts in here, and that we do not require that the assessments be done on a whole group. I would like to see that as part of the working group discussion. Is there an advantage to having the 12 reassessment districts? And is there an advantage to doing the reassessment as a district as opposed to some other method? I would just prefer to not see those first two items actually established here. I would rather those two subjects be part of the working group discussion.
Sorry.
Oh, there's your hand up.
Madam Chair.
Um, so part of my frustration with this process has been that we sort of already had a study and a report process. So I was frustrated that they wanted to study the issue more. I understand why they do, and I'm happy to respect it. But the previous PVR report that was due to us this December included recommendations for analysis and recommendations to move towards the regionalization and the larger appraisal districts as like part of the really significant work that they covered over this summer and fall at our direction.
My concern was that particular study did not include as large a working group as is contemplated. It's not specified here who it is, but it sounded like when they talked to us the other day that there would be a much larger working group, including local boards and local assessors and other people to determine indeed if it made sense to go to the regional. I mean, I know they think it makes sense to go to the regional assessment districts. I just don't know if they consulted enough with the local folks.
So my understanding is that in talking to them this fall as they were doing the work is that they did consult really significantly with the field to come up with the findings and the recommendations they gave us. What they did not dive into is some of the intricacies around appeals and all of those things that we put into the bill. And that's what those details are what they want to work out with further stakeholders. But that the report itself was built on significant field work from between them and their contractor. And I think that's somewhere in the appendix of the report, but I'm not sure. I've read too many things in the last month.
Representative Higley.
So I can agree with Representative. The other thing, Kirby, I know initially there was an increase from $8.50 to $9.50 per year per parcel.
It wasn't actually an increase overall. It was just moving the equalization $1 per parcel fee up to the other and eliminating the equalization. So it was just taking 2 per parcel fees and putting them together, but with no, actual difference to what's sent to towns.
So is that gone? No,
That's gone.
Two existing fees still exist.
But yeah, they still exist and they're still separate.
Representative Brannigan.
And did I miss this, the different categories? Do they thought?
We haven't talked about that yet.
It's next.
It's coming up, okay.
There's some very large changes with that whole concept too that we'll be talking about.
Representative Kimball.
So to Representative Higley's point, I looked in FY 2025 report from tax, I think, can't remember which report it was, but the per parcel payments, the $850 per parcel, is paid out of the general fund. That's $2,879,341. And then the $1 for maintenance of the ground list is $338,746, which is the number of parcels we have in the state. They used to come out of the ed fund, but it's been moved to the general fund.
Just a concern for me in that regard is, was kind of conceived, based on your common level of appraisal when you had to reappraise. And as you know, most people were generally 10 years minimum and up to a lot more. So I just worry that that amount of money isn't going to be nearly enough for every 6-year reappraisal. So.
Yeah, and we had testimony from Mr. Clogfelter, did I get it right? And, yeah,
And,
and that his quotes on a per parcel job were for both inspection, reappraisal, and defending against appeals was $115 a parcel, I believe. So a little bit more than what I was under the impression of. So we have to figure out if we're gonna pay for that, where's the revenue source coming from, right? And we don't have that in this bill.
I suppose as far as, I mean, these are all the points. One maybe unknown thing with the financial part of it is if all these municipalities are getting together to hire a firm, will they get quoted lower numbers? Which the Act 68 report at least indicated that that's possible.
Just, I think from what Mr. Clodbell just said, that wouldn't be the case at all, you know. The hourly time that would take to do a parcel would not be reduced regardless of the district.
Because it's a reinspection versus a reappraisal.
Right.
Representative Holcomb.
Can I just ask, initially we've been talking about 5 of these appraisal districts, now we're at 12, and part of that has been lining it up with what we think the schools are a little bit.
Oh, no, we've always been.
Alright, okay.
Where's my job?
Sure.
Yeah.
So if we don't have lines on this, that doesn't make it a veto.
Well, I didn't think so.
Because he's been talking about vetoing things that don't have boundaries, is that gonna be an issue here?
We have lines.
They have boundaries. So
Okay, just counties.
it's based on counties. The Act 68 report had suggested possibly counties or possibly using school districts as the boundary. And tax, when they come to testify, have mentioned again, like maybe school districts. But since we don't know what those are,
Going with,
if we're gonna have something on the page right now, I mean, counties is what we have.
just making clear.
Representative Wazazak.
Yeah, I just, similar to the broader education bill, we got a phenomenal report in from PVR. Based on that report and the other broader transformation stuff that we've been talking about this year, we had a very big and bold proposal for how to change reappraisals. And after hearing from tax, PVR, all of the witnesses we've heard from over the past couple of weeks, like this feels like a way to respect all of the testimony and some of the flags that have been raised about need for further information while still pushing the conversation forward. And I think that really what this language does to a large extent is establishes the district and then charges the working group in PVR to figure out how the details are going to work. And that feels like a really good compromise based on where we started to where we are now and the testimony that we've heard while still making progress on the issue. So I think we should move forward with this language.
Representative Holcomb.
I agree with the representative, and I appreciate the need, and you've spoken to this, Representative Higley, to use expertise where it exists to yield good outcomes that make life better for Vermonters. And I would just like to respectfully encourage us all to remember that when we get to school district boundaries.
So, I mean, this isn't, it's pretty much a standalone piece that can be brought into, this may not be standalone, it's not standalone, it is integrated. Is it? Kind of, but we can add this as a section into the 454 as we currently have it.
Yes. And for the reports and things, they would have an effective date of on passage most likely, unless you tell me otherwise. And based on everything I've heard about the timelines and what's needed for effective dates for the substantive part, like the establishment of the districts, that would be, and then the 6-year reappraisals, that would be 2030, January 1st, 2030, unless I hear otherwise. That's my understanding is what you want for effective dates. And I'll be doing that as I show you these pieces, because we have to, we've got to give you a final version really soon, so we got to have those numbers.
Representative Higley.
Thank you. So I guess I need to hear what the advantages are of including this in the foundation fund. Other than, well, no, go ahead. I mean,
I think the chair can eloquently state that more than.
The chair can't eloquently speak these days, but she's going to attempt to explain the thinking. So we're here in this particular moment working on this enormous bill because of challenges with both educational delivery, education governance, and education finance. the education finance system is built on our taxes, our tax credits, right? And that's what we sort of worked on in the homestead exemption section. It's based on how money goes to schools. That's the foundation formula. And it's the base itself and the strength and integrity of the base itself and the consistency of the base itself. That's sort of essential to education. To the equity of any tax structure is about the stability, consistency, and equity of the base of that tax. And for a property tax, that's the grand list. And so I think there was broad agreement going into this year that we need to move sort of all the pieces of the systems change simultaneously, and strengthening the base in terms of strengthening the integrity and the quality and the consistency of the grand list is part of that work. And that's why this is in the bill. And I totally understand that some people like sections of this bill more than others. I personally like sections of this bill more than others. And I think it's, some people might vote no on some sections and vote yes on the bill, or might vote yes on some sections and no on the bill. And I think that's just the moment that we're all in together, for better or for worse.
Representative Higley.
So again, I can respect that to some degree. Again, anytime you include, a bill such as this in a larger bill that's maybe even more controversial, it could get overlooked to some degree. I guess I lost my train of thought on what else. You can maybe come back.
Reserve your time.
Understandable, Mark.
Senator from Lowell reserves his time.
It's like a week old, but
Yesterday.
Can I add one more thing? I mean, I think since the beginning of the session, Representative Higley, we've had sort of a fundamental disagreement that you don't think there's a problem to solve here. And I that's valid. We've been working, with tax on the fact that this is a problem and it is a problem to solve. And but I don't know if sort of that fundamental difference is something that will be solved by sort of improving or changing the language. And I, respect that.
Should we at this point take a straw poll on whether or not to, because it's pretty clear as to whether or not to add it into the bill? Or how people vote on it?
Representative Maslin.
I move if you want a straw poll movement, we added it in the bill.
Representative Odie.
No, I was raising, I thought we were taking a straw poll. I was saying yes.
So we have a motion. Is there any discussion?
No discussion, thank you.
That's why.
Kirby, can you stop screen sharing?
Stop screen share, guys.
Thanks.
But wait a minute, Mark remembered what he was gonna say.
Representative Higley.
Just in the nick of time.
This is for Ledge Council. Again, I think, this piece of it is pretty contained without other pieces being in the foundation formula bill, correct? Where the classification piece has pieces within the foundation formula bill. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Am I correct in assuming that? Again, this would be easier as a standalone bill than the classification piece. Other than removing classification piece of the information. You know what I'm
There,
saying?
yes, I don't recall if there's a reference within John's language to RADs.
No.
No. If not, then no, other than the fact that, as the chair had mentioned, the reappraisals, if certain changes take place with the working group, could very easily affect the classification stuff, because under the classification system, if you involve the appraisal process or the valuation process, which we're not doing yet or at this point, but at one point when we discussed this, those were connected, right? So I think that's part of it, is just these things, all three of them were interlinked at one point. Where we are now and the way that they've changed and evolved over time, I would say that the reappraisal part is not linked in the same way. But it still could in the future if this working group makes suggestions along those lines. I think that's the best I can give you.
Thank you.
Representative Holcomb?
I would just like to respectfully suggest that even if it is not technically linked, to me, it is conceptually linked, because what we're trying to do is build trust of Vermonters, that we have a fair and consistent tax base and evaluation and appraisal to support fair and equitable education. And I think in many districts, there are serious concerns generated in part by the terrible backlog in appraisals and challenges and concerns around understanding and making sense of the CLA. And what I like about this is it's pushing us to have more consistent, timely, and coherent appraisals. And so if we're trying to build public trust at a time when people are really struggling, I think we have to do it at the same time. That's why I'm trying to get it in. I support it in the same bill.
Right, I can certainly appreciate that, but again, I think it was mentioned too, not just by me, but with all the changes that are going to be happening, that to me would be one more thing that, a lot of some of our constituency would think, wow, I certainly appreciate everything that we've done to remove this, PVR basically taking over all the reappraisals. I think that's huge. It's a-
Yeah, great.
But I still think there could be perception from the taxpayer that, this is just one more step. Then, of course, especially if we had the classifications, that's some real concerns. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, Maslin has moved that we find Kirby's 2.1, draft 2.1 favorable. And what?
Well,
I'm sorry.
I know now that you've started to call the roll. I was gonna offer another suggestion for perhaps a change that might make me be favorable.
Let's wait. You're change.
You're in the middle of this.
Speak.
One of my concerns was, number one, creation of the district and insisting that the reappraisals be done as one group, that they all jointly agree and have one contractor do it. I notice on page, whatever it is, page 2, in the blue highlighted section, it says, the director shall establish the schedule for every 6 years. But the director could alter the reappraisal schedule for one or more of the regional assessments, members municipalities, based on whatever factors may be out there. Could that also mean that the director could alter the assignment of the reappraisal firm for some of those municipalities? I'm concerned with asking for one contractor to do the whole district when it might make sense to have one contractor do part of the district and at one time frame, and somebody else do another part of the district at perhaps a different time frame based on I don't know, any local things, how recently they were done or something like that. I think in some of our areas, we might have communities object to having one single contractor do the whole county as opposed to one contractor do part of one county because it's more of a metropolitan area and this is more of a rural part of the county. So I'm just wondering if the director can have that discretion as well.
I think this language does what you're saying.
You think so?
Yeah, I think that the language we're looking at under sub B would allow PBR to basically split up the region, have part of it due this year, part of it due next year. And then once PBR has done that, it would require some work between the municipalities and PBR. Once it's done that, it says the member municipalities shall contract jointly with a third party. Okay, but personally, I'm not reading that as requiring it to be the same third party. I'm reading that as an emphasis on with using third parties to conduct the appraisals.
That
But,
is okay.
but maybe that the clarification could be in, but if there was gonna be a clarification, I think it would be in this part about, not implying that it has to be one third party for the entire region. So I don't think that was the intent when TAC suggested this.
Okay,
Um,
that would make it far more amenable to me.
So could you just add in one or more third parties instead of a third party?
let me read,
Sorry, no words.
I would probably just change it slightly differently to state an emphasis on they'll contract with third parties to do this work as opposed to phrasing it in a way that makes it sound like one contract.
Using third parties as opposed to local listers or PDR. Meaning, but the working group may determine later that it should be PDR that does it, but that's a different decision.
Representative Maslin.
Yeah, if it's a friendly amendment, I think you could leave to figure out the words.
That was part of my objection, and if we think we can massage that a bit.
So Kirby, are you confident that you can encapsulate what Representative Feltus is saying and any kind of word changing, or do you need to make those? If we come back to it when the copy that we vote on is,
Yes, I mean, clearly, everything I'm showing you right now is not the committee amendment. It's all going to be moved to the committee amendment. My understanding right now is the plan is Tuesday morning, so this will be moved there to be well before Tuesday morning, if that happens. And at the same time, I can make these alterations and also mark them for you to see that final language before you vote on Tuesday.
you happy with that, Representative Feltus?
Yes.
And just one other
Representative Higley.
clarification. So what we're approving now as a straw poll is the wording in this and that it's going to be included in the foundation fund.
And H 454.
Right. And again, I more than appreciate the efforts that have been done to change some of this based on not what I've said, but certainly enough testimony that we had yesterday was compelling in my mind. But again, I find it objectionable that it's going to be in the foundation fund. That's the only reason.
Representative Brannigan.
And is the plan still such that we would vote on this segment separately from any other segments when we vote on Tuesday? Or would we just be
We're
casting?
not today.
So we're not voting on this section by itself today. We wait till Tuesday. And
Other
then,
way around, we're doing it now. That's the straw poll that's been requested.
Is it do a straw poll on
Marty's correct.
moving it into the big thing?
with Marty's suggestion.
Yes, with Marty's suggestion,
All right.
yeah.
Then Tuesday will be the vote on.
And Tuesday, we will make sure that Marty's language is happy.
We can 50-page to review.
Boiling as you read, you know?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Whistle while you work.
So the motion by Maslin moves that we find draft 2.1 with a slight moderation favorable. This is a straw poll. All in favor? All opposed?
Just, I'm not sure about your vote.
I don't think I vote. You guys want everything. So that would be a yes.
So that was 10-1-0, just to be clear. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
But we're doing it.
that's hard work, yeah.
I appreciate the people who pushed to make it better, so.
Yeah.
At least the next one's a lot harder.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's great. Awesome.
All right, so we're back to 2 point whatever.
Same draft, Kirby.
So I've just pulled up the tax classifications language, which is a standalone document right now, just, if
We
you,
got it.
it's posted, yes.
I'm sorry, where is it again? Because I-
It's under my name, it's posted, it should be labeled tax classifications.
Yeah.
Harold making a lot of.
There's not a draft number here, this is just standalone document for now.
Here.
Okay. Had to be fresh.
So one question I have for you is, before we get into the weeds of this, the effective dates, keep that in mind. John, in your draft, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but the section that calculates the tax rates that's tied to this.
July 1, 2027, John Gray, Council, July.
So my assumption would be that the effective dates for what we're about to look at would be July 1st, 2027 also to line up the other stuff, unless I hear otherwise. Okay. So we have part of the classification concept that we talked about before, but changed pretty drastically. We still have a change to the contents of the grand list and to include a classification. We also, in this language, I want to make sure you're well aware, is the provision from BCGI about whether parcels under the same ownership are merged together on the grand list or not. And, you know, this change means a separate and sellable lot or piece of real estate. Parcels may be combined, represent all contiguous land in the same ownership. So current law is a parcel means all contiguous land in the same ownership. So there's no choice there. They always merge, right? BCGI does not want that.
We have a
We'll have this change.
from Representative Maslin.
My question, would be, what if one, let's assume they're contiguous, but one has a septic system designed and approved and the other does not. I think if that's the case, that they really shouldn't be merged. Complicates.
Say again, I'm sorry.
What if I own two parcels in Thetford Center? One is approved for a subdivision but it's not yet subdivided, but it has a viable septic system that's been approved by DEC. And the other piece is backwoods and it's contiguous, but there's no septic system approved or applied for, anything like that. And I think it would be improper to that a special language to consider them one parcel. If it's one parcel, but I still can't subdivide it because they have different, one has an approved septic and the other doesn't. You can't really treat them the same, it doesn't work.
So under current law, they would be merged.
Right.
This makes it so that they don't have to be for the grand list. Yeah, and it's not, you know, this language is here because it was part of what you've heard testimony about and been proposed relating to parcel data, but it really it's a discrete issue from classifications. I want to make that clear. This is sort of our little footnote side thing that's here, okay?
Representative Higley.
So to your example,
Yeah.
okay, let's say somebody did have a adjoining lot. It was all permitted for a septic system and all that.
Yeah, right.
That was contiguous, same name, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, on the deeds and all that. All that does is it just allows that individual to yield a credit of the combined acreage for taxation. They can still take that other acreage that's deeded separate and sell it separate and have the new septic system design go with it. So that's basically all that it does. I mean,
It doesn't affect your property rights. It affects just how you're taxed and how it's valued.
I understand.
right, so again, Kirby, explain to me what this is doing? This is gonna allow that not to happen.
This
right?
means that two parcels that are side by side could be put on the grand list as two separate parcels, even when they have the same ownership.
And assessed separately. In other words.
Valued, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, let's see.
And again, VCGI testified to this. I don't want to put words in their mouths, but it just had to do with parcel data reasons why they have an interest in this.
In order to trace parcels back through history, is what they're.
Madam Chair,
I just want to, Kirby just started this, but I just want to remind folks, we took testimony about this from two folks at VC, the Vermont GIS office,
Yeah.
and from the state archivist.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a technical change they've been requesting for quite a while, and there just sort of hasn't been the place or moment for it. But I don't know if folks remember, like, there was the map with like the empty
Yeah.
parcels.
Yeah.
Yep.
Representative Kimball.
So speaking for my own district, it had a lot of inactive parcels. When they mapped, they couldn't get any granularity of data as to what those parcels contained because it was such a large area and there was common ownership. And so they were combined, so they couldn't look at the actual information on those parcels individually.
But again, for what purposes? Because if they needed to, they could go into the lister's office and get that information. It is there. We have it written down
Yeah.
that there's a inactive parcel attached to that. We have it in the notes.
I do not feel qualified to answer that question.
And again, that to me, again, is another issue of, if you have two 10-acre parcels and you're gonna break them out separately, that 10-acre parcel value is gonna be huge compared to the other 10-acre parcel. Where now they currently get a benefit for a 20-acre parcel. You still include, if some of the improvements are actually on there, you will include them on that one parcel. Well, it'll be both parcels. Again, it's a concern for me for just overall people probably paying an additional amount on property that's contiguous. They both own. It's been like that for a long time. I just don't understand why VCGI thinks they need that information so readily.
Could I volunteer to get information from them to inform the group? Because I can't remember specifically either. And see if there's a compelling argument to have it.
I think another point is the parcels may be combined or may not be combined. And so then your question would be, what guidance would they use, or what rationale would they use to not combine them or to combine them?
Who's they?
Well, BCGI, I presume.
Right, but my point would be if the individual property owner, chooses to combine them, then they should be allowed to do that too. And this doesn't allow.
It doesn't insist that it be done. You're right.
Yeah. So, and again, the benefit now for people that have contiguous acreage, that's deeded separate, to have that larger parcel included in their overall assessment.
Definitely coming back to.
Thanks.
All right, moving
Move
on.
on with what else is here? Okay. Now for the main event. At least for my part. So property tax classifications, a new section of law. You've seen some of this before. The grand list of a town will include some slightly changed language here. One or more tax classifications for each parcel of real estate. That is because what we're about to look at does account for mixed use. And it divides it by square footage. So now there's a parcel could have one or more classifications assigned to it, proportion, okay? It says a parcel shall be classified using one of the general classifications real estate under B and based off of, I should actually consider whether I should have changed that one there, but anyway. And based on the considerations set forth in the section and by guidance provided by PBR. The listers and assessors shall annually update the grand list to include a tax classification no later than June 1 of every year. And I'll stop there and explain why that says June 1. You heard some testimony about how it can be confusing and it can be problematic to have tax classifications where some of the classifications are based off of the current year use of it, whereas some of the others were retroactive or could be retroactive because they're relying on data that had been or data from forms that had been filed previously. So one thing that this does is a few things this does. Okay, we have two classifications in the law now: homestead, non-homestead. This expands it to 4, from 2 to 4, and all 4 of those will be based off of the use of the parcel or the portion of a parcel in the current year. It's all prospective. You heard Jake say, and others who testified, mention a prospective use. So in different ways, these are going to be determined by what the property owner is attesting to, how it will be used in the current year and in the near future. Okay, and we'll get into that. June 1st is because homestead declarations are currently filed along with income taxes. There's no proposal to drastically change things like that here. So if homestead declarations are being filed in April, this does connect with the reappraisals and the grand list date, by the way. We're asking how that links with other things because we have to keep a January 1 grand list date in mind when we're talking about this issue. But the homestead declarations are still going to be filed in April. And some of these classifications are based off of whether something's a homestead, including the homestead category, of course, which means it has to be after April 15 that you determine these. If we're relying on current year homestead declarations. So I put June 1st here because maybe May 1st is a little too soon after April. There's also language in here that accounts for the fact that sometimes people file their homesteads even later than June 1st, which we have a current system in the law in place for when a person has until April 15 to get the homestead declaration in, and then after that it becomes really troublesome to correct it. But up until October 15, people can file. So there's some language in here to kind of account for that too. So I'm going to proceed. Listers and assessors shall annually update the grand list to include a tax classification no later than June 1st of every year, using information submitted to the Department of Taxes pursuant to this section. That information will be landlord certificates, homestead declarations, and if tax chooses, there's language in here to create a new form if it feels it needs it to fill any gaps of information that's missing. Okay. The tax classification may be updated after June 1 when a taxpayer files or corrects an erroneously filed homestead declaration after June 1st. I just included that expressly to allow that to be corrected. And then we get into subsection B. A parcel shall be assigned one or more of the following general classes. 1, homestead. I think you're all familiar with that. This is alphabetical, by the way. That's why they're listed in the way that they're listed. I would not have listed.
Yeah, it's not by rate. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't, I mean, I just don't think logically homestead to apartment to non-residential to residential is necessarily the order that I would characterize that in my mind, but it's alphabetical. It's all alphabetical. So those are our categories you can think of, and I'll show you the definitions in a minute. You can think of non-homestead, non-residential as basically the equivalent of what we call the non-homestead rate right now. And we don't have differences in rates for any of these in the law right now, but I think you can think about what you know about this building and where tenancies lie. That we have renters and we have second homeowners and we have homeowners and we have all the other non-the property. And I think you can figure out for yourself what the expectation for the rates will be, okay? Or like roughly, at least in comparison to one another. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. Okay, so getting into.
It's always saying.
Somebody had to, right?
It's just, I don't know, I mean, maybe I should not talk about the rates at all. It's just, there was a lot of confusion in the testimony, so I just thought we should at least frame it up. So that, to take the uncertainty out of it, right? We heard a lot about uncertainty and about rates yesterday. And so I think what I just said was addressed. Maybe there's not as much uncertainty if you really think about how this is gonna go, right? Okay, moving on. Definition of homestead means a parcel or a portion of a parcel declared as a homestead on or before October 15 in accordance with section 54010, which is the section requiring the filing of homestead declarations. So we know what that means. Second definition, again, this is alphabetical. Actually, no, I'm gonna do it more logically. I'm gonna start with what's going to probably be called by some people as the second home rate, or the second home and short-term rentals rate, which will be non-homestead residential. So that's defined as a parcel or a portion of a parcel with one or more dwelling units habitable on a year-round basis for which a homestead was not declared or for the current year, and a landlord certificate was not filed pursuant to the landlord certificate requirement, in which the landlord attested that the unit would be leased to a long-term tenant for a minimum of 6 months in the current year. That last part is added as a qualification because under current law, the landlord certificate requirement exists for landlords who have a tenant for 30 days or more. And if you left it at that and didn't specify any further for the tenancy, then you're allowing, and maybe you would choose to, so 6 months is the placeholder, you can think of it, if you don't want that. But if we didn't mention that, then it'd be 30 days. You could avoid paying at this rate if you just file the landlord certificate and it says, I had a tenant for 30 days. And there could be some compliance concerns around that, right? And whether just having a tenant for 30 days and then it being vacant the rest of the year is within the policy goals you have for this, right? So you have to think about whether the 6 months is something you want.
Representative Odie has a question.
I'm wondering if it's a concern, whether there's actual consideration. A lease would have, it's a contract, so there'd be consideration, but we don't know whether there will be rent paid. We don't know which way payment will go, does that matter?
That's not part of, no, it's not part of like the way the landlord certificate works right now. It's just, there's a requirement to file one if you have a tenant for at least 30 days. It exists for the renter rebate or the renter credit. Because at 30 days is when a person can start qualifying, like 1 month's rent, it's when you could qualify for a renter credit. We've heard testimony that there's a lot of landlords that don't bother with the certificate, even though they are legally required to file one, because they know that their tenants won't qualify for a renter credit anyway, so why bother? This will create a why bother, right? This will create an incentive so that every landlord files that credit like they're supposed to, or that certificate like they're supposed to. There's some questions around the department's responsibility and checking compliance on that too. Like both ways for when certificates should be filed and they're not. And also under this, you could have a compliance concern of people filing landlord certificates when really they didn't have a tenant for 30 days. And because by filing one, you get yourself out of this tax rate. So that's why the landlord certificate becomes an issue in administering this. And maybe the trickiest part of this whole setup. But it's for the current year. And one thing I'll add that I don't know if I've mentioned, but you see some of this language refers to that the landlord attested that the unit would be used. So without telling the department where or how it's supposed to do that, there's just a provision that the department will amend existing forms and publish new forms as needed to gather the necessary attestations and declarations required under this section. So it doesn't try to tell the department how to do it, but it gives them the ability to add attestations to existing forms like homestead declarations and landlord certificates that they need to try to start monitoring these definitions.
Representative Holcomb.
Just to be very helpful explanation, and just to be clear, was this language reviewed by tax, or is this language that tax suggested as a way to deal with this?
This language was not suggested by tax. This language has been sent to tax. It was sent to tax last night. I have not heard feedback specifically about it. I spoke briefly to Deputy Commissioner Samaroff about what I was thinking of putting it together based on the direction I was given. And that's it. That's all I can say, I guess. We heard from their testimony yesterday that they might be able to deal with one or two new classifications.
Representative Cornhager, did you have a question?
I was just gonna add that this was an attempt to meet them in the much more limited number of classifications and the need to have categories have sort of validation attached to them.
And yeah, so we don't have all the commercial, industrial, resort, all that stuff. It's gone, would not be something that has to be tracked into this system, right? So you've seen the non-homestead residential category. Just step back and just give you some picture of what types of property owners would fall in this. It would be people who own a residence in Vermont that's not their homestead, as in they live somewhere else, and they're not renting it out long-term. It could be housing units that are owned and are rented out for short-term unit or short-term rentals only. And it could be some other uses, though, of things that get caught up in this, just to be completely, transparent with you about what exists out there. It could be someone who's renovating a place, right? And there's no renter there, there's no one living there, and because it's in the process of being renovated, and it would also fall within this definition, as we have it. A camp that's not habitable year-round, though, would not fall into this. A place that's being renovated, but it was nonetheless rented out for half the year and was renovated for the other half of the year, would not be considered the non-homestead residential.
So camp, as you just mentioned, would be non-homestead, non-residential,
Unless it was
Unless
year
it's
round.
unless it was year-round, right?
If it's not year-round, then it's not going to be in this category.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll move on to the other definition that's it could be a little difficult to follow here. So that's the non-homestead apartment one. So it says it means a parcel or a portion of a parcel, which we're going to get into the portionality thing soon, with one or more dwelling units for which a landlord certificate was filed in the previous year, and the landlord attested the unit would be leased to a long-term tenant for a minimum of 6 months. So that's more straightforward, and that is a matter of landlord certificates are filed, by the way, in on January 15th. And when the landlord files their landlord certificate, they're reporting their tenants from last year. So that when those people go in that April, that upcoming April, and go to possibly file for a renter credit, the Department of Taxes has that information and they can match up the landlord certificate to that renter, right? And there's a column for number of months in the previous year. This is prospective, right? We're not looking at what they did last year. There was presumably going to need to be a line added, an attestation. Do you plan to rent out this unit for at least 6 months in the current year or the upcoming year, or something like that? And that attestation would be what's tied to what we're talking about here. So to be very clear about, it's not retroactive. It's not looking at what's reported on the landlord's for the last year. It's all written to be current year. And what use is being attested to for that current year directly from the property owner. It's a more of an honor system approach, but a lot of the stuff we have in this area when it comes to declaring your homestead and landlord certificates, and it's just a lot of honor system in this area of our law as it is, and just income taxes in general, right? So that's apartment. And then non-homestead, non-residential means a parcel or portion of a parcel that does not qualify as a homestead or the other things. So, it's the what's left over from our current non-homestead rate or tax base, non-homestead tax base, after you take the apartments and the second home type homestead, not homestead residential properties out of it. So I'm going to move on to how this deals with mixed use, which you've heard a lot about. This is modeled off of what we do currently with homesteads, just to give you a refresher on current law when it comes to homesteads. If you use a portion of your homestead for a business purpose and 20 or more than 25% of the floor space of your homestead's used for that, then you have to indicate that on your homestead declaration, and you end up getting taxed the non-homestead rate on that portion if it exceeds 25% of floor space. If it doesn't exceed it, then the whole place is your homestead, even though there's some business being done there. If it doesn't exceed 25% of the floor space. And we've also heard testimony about under current law, can be debatable what you count as floor space when that floor space is used for multiple purposes, right? I try to get at that here.
Yeah.
Okay, so a parcel with two or more portions of qualifying for different tax classifications under this section shall be classified proportionally based on the percentage of floor space used. And then subdivision 1, in the case of a homestead with 25% or less floor space used, what this is saying is we're not changing current law. What I just told you about homesteads that have some business activity going on, but it doesn't exceed 25%, we're still going to call the whole thing a homestead. Because my understanding is that there's not been a desire to try to change current law relating to homesteads at all, right? So that's what the first thing does. The second thing, if a portion of floor space is used for more than one purpose, the use in which the floor space is most often used. So there's a time element added, which is not something that exists in current law for the other thing. Okay. But if we're going to do mixed use and we're going to do it proportionally based off of floor space, I think it makes sense to try to address the multiple use of floor space. So if a portion of the floor space is used for more than one purpose, the use in which the floor space is most often used shall be considered the primary use, and the floor space shall be dedicated to that use for purposes of tax classification. Just like with current law and homestead declarations, when you tell the department when you're filing your homestead declaration what percentage of your floor space you use for business, self-reported. I'm imagining how this is going to have to be administered by the Department of Taxes as well. It's going to just be self-reported And again, on the forms that they have, that they collect this information for, they'll have to have a question about floor space, or about multiple uses and floor space. Will have to be something that they would, track down. I'm also, at the same time, I want to take a step back and say, looking at these four things and what information or what forms exist that are going to be used for each one to get an idea of how this could be administered, okay? Homestead, we already know that, we're already doing it. Covered. Non-homestead apartment, that is going to be based off of the landlord certificate, and it's going to be based off of gathering some additional information. Certificate. Homestead, non-residential. Well, as long as we can collect info on the other things, we don't need an additional form for that. Last one, non-homestead residential. This is based off of when a landlord certificate's not filed, or one is filed, but the number of months and the attestation are not adequate to the limit you have for the minimum rental. And then also lack of homestead declaration. This will be the one when it comes to administration that the department might look at the grand list and residential properties that exist. There might have to be some additional groundwork on their part, or the department will have to possibly develop a form to catch the situations in which the person owns residential property, they don't file income taxes in Vermont, they don't file a homestead. That's the administration area here where the department's going to have to do some work. I'm just going to flag that for you. The rest of it, though, is covered with what already exists.
Sorry to interrupt. I just really appreciate you saying that, because like when we're diving into the sub bullets and all of this stuff, it can feel really complicated, but the structure that you've proposed here with a little bit of administrative lift from tax fits into systems that we're already using. And so I just think that that's really helpful framing.
Yeah. And again, it's all lined up in a way where it's all prospective uses. So there's not, so that they're all in line with one another and how a property is used in the current year. So moving on, we do have the provision that we had before about current use, just to make sure that there's no misunderstanding that this somehow affects treatment under use value appraisal. And then there's this provision about appeals. And I did not call out specific sections of law on purpose, because for one thing, I think some of those might change depending on where reappraisals and things go in the future. So just in the manner provided for property valuation appeals under this title, which I certainly interpret to mean grievances and everything else from there. And that this is not trying to change that valuation appeal structure or anything like that. And hopefully the department agrees with me that this is clear enough for that. And I think I covered this new concept for going at tax classifications. Any question?
Kirby, do we have the rates of the tax that's going to be applied?
That's important before rates of one.
Yes, so John showed you earlier where in law those would be listed. And the idea under the new structure, and someone who's more well-versed in the ed reform side, chime in if I say anything incorrect, we'll have one tax rate, and it will be multiplied by the factors for those four different classifications, is how it will work, instead of having a different tax rate for each thing.
And again, in the draft that we're looking at, all of the tax rates are the same. So for all intents and purposes, all this is doing is further classifying the properties that exist. The tax rate is going to be the same, assuming the draft of 454 gets passed as is. But
Yeah. Don't want to make it look like we're hiding anything here, though. We're putting those factors into the law with the expectation that they will be modified.
yes, so
I mean, and that is part of the policy that you're voting on here, is that
Yes.
you have an interest in having a different rate for different categories.
Yes.
Classifications, sorry.
right, 100%, but in the spirit of, only doing so much at one time. But this is a good
Yeah,
first.
and this would be effective, as we said before,
Mhm.
January 1st, 2027. So between now and then, presumably, and those factors would get decided, but they're not being decided in this bill right now.
Representative Higley.
Yeah, just to say, in the governor's proposal, he was looking at one continuing down the road. I think we had talked about this before. I just looked it up. This was in 2014. I don't know what it is today. It's probably up and down, but it says that there was 112 towns in Vermont where the residential rate was higher than the non-residential rate. So again, that's I would think by going to a one rate would definitely help out in that regard. I mean, I've got one town that's just adamant that they can't believe that, folks in town that have non-residential property or, granted, I know they have a income sensitivity piece to it right now, but again, it's just really concerning to them. So, and again, I think, whether or not there's any figures in here now, we, like you had said, we have to go into this understanding that that's the direction that we want to head in, and I don't want to head in that direction, so I'll be voting no.
So I'd like to call on Julia. I asked about any projected revenues.
Sure, Julia Richter, JFO, because right now there's no factors applied against the rate, and we're talking about future out years, we can't project right now how this would differ in terms of revenues. I mean, that would all depend on the factors that were applied, of course, and other pieces in the education fund.
Thank you. Representative Wabzazik.
That's what you say different every time, especially. And I will just say, like, for I've heard a couple of things from constituents over and over again in the context of how much we're spending on education, why we can't make those second homeowners who own very large houses that are empty for most of the year, that have extremely high value, typically in resort areas. Why can't we tax the second homeowners? And the answer to that is because of the lack of proper classifications within our tax system. And I've also heard from constituents that are concerned about, like, listen, I have a small shack on Lake Elmore. We use it for 3 months. There's no infrastructure there. Why should I pay the same rate, as someone who has a giant house in Killington, like my ex-in-laws have? And that is also true. It's a gorgeous house. It has the old bathtub. And that's also addressed by the, not being habitable year round. It much like, I think, our the build out, the language we talked about around assessments, this does not go as far as I would like, but based on the testimony that we've heard, strikes a middle ground while also giving us more levers to make our tax system more equitable and be more reflective of folks' ability to pay, while also potentially addressing a housing shortage and bringing more units online in a year-round way. So I think it's a really good first step. And yes, the intention of this, let's be clear, is to eventually tax second homeowners at a higher rate where it makes sense. And so I strongly support it.
Representative Maslin.
Yeah, I think you just in your last sentence or two said essentially what I'm thinking, which is we need to do the classification first. And we can have a robust debate and we can decide if we're gonna have differential rates for, a shack versus a multi-million-dollar second home, so. We can't, I think it'd be really unwise to try to do it all at once.
I was gonna say basically the same thing, but inversely, and even with classification, there's nothing to say we couldn't apply the same rate to all applications.
Right. Versus just identification of what's.
Representative Feltus.
To answer Teddy's question, why can't we tax them more? My response is, why should we? What responsibility do second homeowners have to our education system? The purpose of this tax is to gain money for our education system. And I think there is no differential in terms of responsibility from a second homeowner to a commercial to an industrial. And I just don't feel that it's a reasonable place to look for extra money. I mean, they're going to be paying a high rate, a high value because of the rate, because of the value of the property, perhaps, but I don't think there's a justification to change the rate.
Representative Holcomb.
And as somebody who has visited some towns with significant encroachment of second homes, in a per pupil funding formula, what we're seeing is homes that used to have families with kids now have going to be empty for a lot of the year. And that means that's affecting the student count in those districts, which affects the enrollment in those schools. If it's cheaper to carry it as a second home than it is for the person with the 3 kids trying to live at the same place that has to pay a rate that's 50 cents higher, we're actually incentivizing the removal of families with kids from our school system, which in turn drives up our per pupil cost. So it is related.
Representative Kornheiser.
Hey, I just want to make sure the technical language works for people who are interested in this language being in the bill. I think it's a really important philosophical conversation, and I'm glad we're having it. I just want to make sure that while Kirby's sitting there, any technical issues with this language are ironed out so we can have a philosophical conversation and then straw poll it. Also, I hear my voice fading, so I'm gonna stop.
Yeah. To that point, I think it works. There's still questions about what property ends up in what category, and there would be endless permutations of that we could play out. But to the extent of this gives the ability to at least set the homestead and non-homestead tax rate as the same, whereas in our current formula, that opportunity doesn't exist because of the way we fund education. So at least there gives an opportunity to be equal.
Representative Higley.
Quickly again, I look at this the same way I did the previous one in regards to what the general public's gonna look at when we're trying to make such huge changes in our foundation formula. And they're gonna also look at this. We got people in this room, we got people online, I'm sure, people that were here yesterday. This is a big concern for them. And they're gonna look at it in the respect of being in this foundation formula bill. And I just think that it doesn't belong. Real concern.
Representative Wazazak.
Just to respond to that, Mark, respectfully too, I think that the foundation formula has to do with how we're getting money out of the ed fund and to the schools, and this relates to how we bring money into the ed fund. So in that way, I think that there is a clear, even if we can disagree on the policy goal of it, I think that that's what makes it germane, for lack of a better term.
Well,
two sides of the same coin.
To even go further with my point, I mean, I think we had enough testimony in the foundation formula that a foundation formula doesn't necessarily reduce the cost of education, right? So people are gonna, if you hear that, if you spread that word is out there, they're gonna say, oh, it's still gonna go up, whether we do this or not. And on top of that, because I own a business or whatever, then I'm gonna get zapped again on top of the increase that they're saying through the foundation formula is still gonna go up. So it's kind of a double whammy, I hope you can understand that perspective as well.
Representative Kornheiser.
One, I'm hearing that no one has any technical questions for Kirby. I wonder if he could be excused from sitting there. And two, I just want to offer the reason that I think it belongs in this bill particularly is that the foundation formula is going to change the way resources are distributed around the state. The homestead exemption is going to change the way tax liability is distributed around the state. So those two things need to happen at the same time. So to not be have different disruptions each year. And if we're gonna do this, which I think there's significant momentum to do so, then that needs to happen aligned with those two other or four or three other things so that they can all, so that we have concurrent disruptions that become one disruption instead of 5 different disruptions over 5 years, which frankly is how we've been operating for the last few years. And it's incredibly destabilizing to all of us and our schools. The other thing I would want to just offer, and it's very frustrating from the Ways and Means Committee room, is that the way we spend less on education is an education policy issue for the most part. We can move things out of the education fund, but most of reducing spending in education is about changing policy. And I think the Education Committee has sent us a bill that takes some really huge leaps forward to do that. And I think next year we're going to take even some more leaps on that. But that is unfortunately like slow human scale work.
Representative Odie.
I make a motion that we take the straw poll on this because it will come, because it seems like there are no objections to the technical language.
So is that a motion to
Motion to
approve?
approve.
Draft? Is there a number on this?
She would definitely.
No.
No, but, yeah.
Draft language, new tax classifications to be incorporated into
You can put a date on it if you want to put a date at the top, 4/4. Didn't really give it a number. You could also cite the Ledge Council number. The document number.
Yeah, but also it says 4-3.
At 6:34 PM.
Okay. So Representative Odie has moved to approve draft language of 4/3/2025 by KK. Favorable.
You ready for?
Representative Holden.
No, I'm sorry, I thought we were voting.
Oh, I didn't.
Oh, are you voting?
I wasn't looking, I'm sorry.
Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed?
I believe that's 640 or 641. Did you abstain? Did you raise your hand, Emily? Okay. It's the 740.
Yes, I voted yes.
Okay.
Please explain your vote.
All right. What else you got, Kirby?
All right. I'm not done.
All right.
Possible. Oh, we're to the miscellaneous.
Oh, the miscellaneous.
So the rest of it's.
That's right.
My favorite one.
I believe the committee has seen all of these before. But these are all pieces. Some of which I think I mentioned were from H-135, which was the miscellaneous provisions or the policy and administrative changes that has been pieces of which have gone to different places to this point, right? The first thing is a technical correction that came from Legislative Council to point out that a provision of law went missing. There's been no ill effects from this. It was pointed out to us by a legal database company. This happened a couple of years ago. I'd like to note that I've only been working here a couple of years. A provision didn't take off on my watch so far that I know of. So yeah, this would just be to add it in, and it's important to us because there was no we can't trace this back to the General Assembly deciding to remove this. It's not that it's causing a problem, it's just that it's a housekeeping measure that's important to our process, right? So we're asking to have that added back. It just relates to, it's a clarifying provision that has the department do something that they're supposed to do, and they've been doing it. So again, no negative consequence. The second provision I had was something that the committee had asked for, which was to change in the tax sales statute to add a minimum of $1,500 before a tax sale can be initiated. So this language doesn't live anywhere else right now, and it was something that the committee was interested in at one point this session.
We heard from that study group that looked at this last summer, and presented us to the recommendation of a $1,500 minimum amount before he could go into the tax sale.
That's true. Yes. So that group did actually recommend this.
Yeah, just to sort of repeat for everyone, all the rest of this language is stuff that was going to be in our miscellaneous tax bill that's related to property taxes, basically. So everyone's looked at all of this before. It just was a bajillion years ago.
The next section I have here is the bump in PVR part-time hearing officer pay that was requested by the administration. It does not live anywhere right now, and assume PVR still wants to do this, right? So that's what the next piece is. The one after that is, if you recall, last session, the department had said that they wanted to eliminate the $15 late fee for late property tax credit claims. The General Assembly agreed. It was deleted in 2 places, and in the previous year, a third instance of the same $15 late fee was found. And so to clean up and to be consistent with the intention from last session, we have language to get rid of it here.
Representative Higley.
Good.
I usually.
We're just so used to it.
Any questions about any of these pieces?
I'd move that we add the miscellaneous portions of the tax bill as presented into 454.
You find this.
Find it favorable,
Yes.
or, yeah.
Ruby, will you stop screen sharing? Thanks.
Language from 4.2. KK. Okay. Representative Kimball moves favorable the language from 4.2 from Kirby on the miscellaneous pieces favorable. All in favor?
Just kidding.
I'm going to vote against just for the giggles.
Glad I could bring you together.
Mr. Kirby, we call him.
Okay.
You done?
No, we're not done. We might be done with Kirby.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else for you.
All right.
Maslin has a motion to adjourn, just waiting.
Representative Kimball.
I was thinking 5 minutes, maybe 4. Unless people just want to power right through, going back through the bill and.
No,
voting on
5
sections.
minutes, 10 minutes.
I'm okay with powering through.
How many more minutes do you cover?
I would love a 1-minute break.
Yeah. Let's do,
About 5.
let's do 5.
Maybe 5.